Hi, we are working on lesson number 22. This is a review after you've already had day 1, day 2, and day 3 of lesson number 22. Tomorrow will be your 4th day with that lesson, and it's your test day. So we're having a review. Your goal today is to be able to compare and contrast two versions of the same story. That's the same goal that we've had for the whole week. That's what our learning target has been. What your lesson today is going to do is going to help you to remember how to compare and contrast and what elements that you should look for when you read each story to try to say how each story is alike and how they are different from when you're comparing them with one another. So we want to continue to remember this learning target, and we're going to go from there into what we should look for with our stories. So when you are doing a compare and contrast of two stories, I'm going to show you how to use a new tool in order to help to organize your thoughts. This is a chart that we usually use during math class, but for this chart, I'd like you to use a piece of notebook paper. I'm going to show you just on a piece of notebook paper. What I would do is I would have my fresh piece of paper, draw a big line across the top, and then make a few columns with those lines. That's what this is on my board. Your paper should be the same. You could use a pencil for these lines. You don't have to use a marker. I'm just using a marker because that's what I have available. When you are using this to organize and compare and contrast two stories, this is the same as when you're using those circles. This area in the middle is what both things have in common. This is when you compare them. When you compare something, you tell how it is alike. On these opposite sides, that's how you are going to be contrasting them. So you will have one story over here, and you will have one story over here. You'll tell how each story is different. When you're thinking about ways that stories are different, I would like for you to think of the characters. I would like for you to think of the setting, the events, the beginning events, the middle events, the ending events in that particular story. I'd also like for you to think about the lesson of the story. We're going to dive into this, but essentially you would have that on both sides. C-H-A. I am not spelling correctly. C-H-A-R-A-C-T-E-R-S. The characters, the setting, the events, and the lesson. You wouldn't leave these words. Instead, like if we were doing that Three Little Pigs story, instead of putting the characters word, I would fill in the 3 pigs and the wolf. Instead of having the word characters, I would fill in, for the story number 2, the 3 geese over on that side. We'll dive into that in just a second. I want to talk about what you would write for each story. So we're first going to talk about the story characters and kind of what I was saying. So this is just kind of a focus in on what you would write on the first column. Over here in this area, when I'm saying write about the characters in the story, you're going to be writing that on this first column on your assignment today. So this is a little bit more information of how I want you to organize that. So I'm going to just draw this, and I'm going to just say story number 1. I would talk about the characters. This would mean who the characters are, who is the story about, who are the characters in that story. That one's pretty self-explanatory. I would talk about the setting. Where is that story taking place? Don't tell me a kindergarten answer of this story is taking place outside. No, be very specific. It's taking place at a park in January in the summer. Very specific type of setting. Where exactly that the story is taking place. When it comes to the third item that I'd like you to think about, the events in the story. How is story number 1 different from story number 2? Think about the events. What is happening in the beginning of the story? What is happening in the middle of that story? And what is happening in the end of that story that's not the same as the other story? We know that the characters are probably going to be different. So that's why I want you to think about how the characters are different or who those characters are. The setting, where exactly is that story taking place? Because it's likely going to be different. It could have some similarities, and you would find out those similarities as you're considering those things and as you're thinking of them. When it comes to the events, think about the things that happen in the beginning of that story. Think about the middle. Is there a problem? Is there a growing problem that's going to have a resolution at the end? Those are the types of events that I want you to think about. Those big, big, big events that add details to the story. The last thing I want you to think about is the lesson. I do want to talk a little bit more about the lesson of the story. Essentially, the lesson is the moral of the story. It is the central message of the story. And you might be trying to say, I don't really know what central message means. I don't know what the moral of the story means. When we're talking about the lesson or the moral or the central message, it just means what is the reason that the author is sharing this story with you? What's the big idea that this author wants you to remember? And maybe it's an idea that you're able to apply to your own life. Think about the story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. When we read that story in class, you were supposed to be thinking, I should always tell the truth, because sometimes when I tell a lie, people might not remember when I tell the truth. They might not think that it's correct. They might think that I'm telling a lie even when I'm telling the truth. So when you're thinking about the lesson, that just means the moral of the story, the reason why the author wrote that story, the message that the author wants you to remember, and maybe it's even something that you can apply to your own life as well. So essentially, that's the kinds of things that you should remember when you're doing a compare and contrast. Think about the characters. Think about how those characters impact the setting of the story or the events of the story. So for today, what I want you to be doing to kind of review the things that you've learned, instead of drawing the circles that overlap like this for our Venn diagram, because sometimes we don't have as much space in the middle, I want you to make this chart that I've drawn so that you have more space to write. Making the chart on the paper like this is going to give you those lines. You're going to need this kind of information when you do your test on Friday. So, again, what I want you to do is make a chart like this. When you fill in these 2 items, I want you to go on our class YouTube page, and I'd like for you to choose 2 of the Goldilocks stories. There are a couple of alternate fairy tales for Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. I want you to choose 2 of those stories, and I'd like for you to fill in these boxes. Tell how they are alike, what they both do, A-L-I-K-E, and then tell how they are different. That's what I want you to put in these far boxes, the ways that they are different. When you're trying to remember differences in the story, think about the characters. This one might have Goldilocks. This one might have Goldie Rocks. It depends on which story that you choose to figure out what the characters are. Think about the lesson. Think about the things that they have in common. Is there a big bad wolf in Goldilocks and the 3 Bears? Probably not. So think about the things that are particular to that story. I do think this should be kind of fun for you. I'm giving you a little bit of flexibility with which stories that you'd like to choose. So choose 2 that are really interesting to you that might bring you a little bit of joy as you're reading them as well. I hope you have fun with this. You will be having a test on this tomorrow where you're going to have to do a short response on how to tell the ways that the stories are alike and the ways that the stories are different. So using a tool like this is going to help you to be able to create those sentences that you're going to have to do for tomorrow's test. So please take this seriously. Don't write just basic answers. Try to include, this story is different because the characters are, and then tell the characters. The setting is blah, 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 blah. The events in this story tell me, and then tell what the events are. Then tell on this side. This story has the characters of, it's different because the setting is, the examples from the story for the events are, and just tell all of those things. They are alike because both stories, blah, 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 blah. You should be able to do this. It should be fun. You should get an instant 100, and I hope you have a nice time with it. Take care. Bye-bye.